Do you love watching people climb up buildings and throw themselves off of them in cool ways? If you do, these lesser-known parkour action movies are not to be missed. Frenchman David Bell, the founding father of parkour, brought together a group of like-minded physically fit people and taught them le méthode naturelle, or natural movement. Bell saw parkour as a solid way to train, but some of his friends thought it needed more flair. This led to the development of free running, a parkour offshoot that includes flips and fancy tricks. These differences of opinion led Bell to split from the group, which would become known as the Yamakasi, a Congolese word meaning strong in one's person. In 1998, the Yamakasi got their big break after catching the imagination of Luc Besson, who saw their high-flying antics on a TV news report. The French filmmaker cast them as ninjas in the film Taxi 2, and then decided to write a full screenplay based on the team. Released in 2001, Yamakasi became the first genuine parkour movie, and its thrilling action sequences still stand up today. The movie follows the team as they attempt to raise money for a sick boy who needs a new heart. 9-year-old Jamel suffered a cardiac arrest after falling from a tree, and a shady surgeon is trying to rip the boy's mother off. When the Yamakasi find out, they start hitting the houses of the hospital's board of directors, hoping to put enough cash together to save the kid. Taylor Lautner was a big name in Hollywood when his New York set parkour action flick Tracers started shooting in 2013. The former Twilight star plays Cam, a bike messenger in heaps of debt with increasingly impatient gangsters. He's living out of a rented garage and struggling to keep his head above water when a chance encounter with high-flying beauty Nikki sends him tumbling headfirst into a world of crime and free running. Nikki is part of a group that uses parkour to pull off heists around the city, and Cam has to learn the ropes fast if he wants to join.
That's the great thing about parkour, my friend. There are no rules.
Obviously, Lautner had to be in top shape for the role, and he ended up doing all his own stunts. He told Entertainment Weekly, "It was actually quite surprising to me. I did extensive training in LA with the best people in parkour, but there were some pretty insane stunts, and I think they just about let me do everything." Lautner's physicality and commitment made for some impressive action sequences, but the film failed to find an audience. It didn't come out until 2015, when Twilight Mania was fading. However, some critics were able to appreciate Tracers for what it is, an often exhilarating love letter to the Big Apple. The New York Times wrote in its review, "The film shows love not just for stunts, but for the dynamic surfaces of the city." The Chronicles of Narnia star William Moseley leads the line in 2013's Run, a film about a teenage parkour enthusiast who gets talked into becoming a cat burglar by his old man. Petty crook Mike and his son Daniel travel from city to city hitting jewelry stores and pawn shops. They've been avoiding returning to New York City on account of Daniel's mob boss uncle, who blames Mike for the death of his sister. But it looks like they've run out of other places to go. When they return, Daniel quickly falls in with the city's free-running crowd, and he starts to question his allegiance to his father.
It's self-expression. Moving through your environment, freeing your body.
Run was a labor of love for writer-director Simone Bartasaggi, who decided to quit his managing job and began working on a movie about parkour after falling in love with it. There was some buzz about the script, and Bartasaggi won the Milan International Film Festival's award for Best Screenplay. So why hasn't anyone heard of the film? Critics weren't too fond of the other aspects of Run, especially its ending, as Film Intuition wrote in its review. Ignoring the prospect of what might have been a far better payoff for the subject matter involving a parkour contest that's mentioned and then immediately discarded, Run instead takes a gangster B-movie shortcut in its final act. That doesn't mean Run isn't worth your time though. The review continued, "Parkour enthusiasts will still want to give Run a spin since so few representations of what they do have made their way to the silver screen." David Bell had parted ways with the Yamakasi by the time Luc Besson wrote the film of the same name, but Besson would go on to work with parkour's pioneer in a later project. The director co-wrote and produced 2004's District 13, a frenetic French actioner that takes place in an area of Paris that's been overrun by crime. It's become so bad that Parisian authorities have walled the district off from the rest of the city, leaving the poor inhabitants to fend for themselves. When a government bomb is smuggled into the slums, Leto teams up with undercover cop Damien to find it, uncovering a sinister plot by the ruling class in the process. Helmed by Pierre Morel, who would go on to direct Liam Neeson in Taken, District 13 was well received in France and the US. While most acknowledged that the plot wasn't exactly groundbreaking, the stunning action sequences more than made up for it. In a glowing review, the New York Times waxed lyrical about the athleticism and artistry on show throughout, saying, "Parkour isn't par for the course movie mayhem. but a gorgeously choreographed gymnastics of pain that elevates District 13 over the impossible missions and last stands of the season. The vast majority of critics agree that District 13 is worth a watch. This white-knuckle roller coaster ride holds an impressive 80% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, certified fresh. The 2009 sequel to District 13 brought gravity-defying stars David Bell and Cyril Raffaelli back together for another thrill ride through dystopian Paris. District 13 Ultimatum sees our heroes continue their efforts to bring down the walls surrounding the slums and rid the area of drug dealers for good. Now there's mass unrest after 2 police officers turn up dead in the district. But Lito and Damien soon discover that it's a frame job. Corrupt government agents plan to blow up the 5 tower blocks at the center of the district and replace them with luxury apartments. Ultimatum isn't too dissimilar to the first District 13 in terms of setup, but the action is definitely taken up a notch. While the original concentrated largely on Bell's parkour, Luc Besson wanted to make sure to make the most of Raffaelli's martial arts skills this time around. Both men pull off multiple physically impressive feats during the movie's 106-minute runtime, which flies by in what feels like an instant. Like its predecessor, District 13 Ultimatum is certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes, with a 74% rating. Paris is swapped out for Detroit in 2014's Brick Mansions, the American remake of District 13. Luc Besson and David Bell were once again involved, but Cyril Raffaelli was replaced by Paul Walker in what would end up being his penultimate movie appearance. It was a move Bell approved of. When one fan complained about the change on Twitter, Bell defended the decision, tweeting, "Personally, I like very much the work Paul Walker has done. The film will be a new experience for me, and I look forward to working with him." As is usually the case with Hollywood remakes of foreign films, Brick Mansions didn't live up to the original. There isn't as much breathtaking parkour as District 13, and Paul Walker doesn't match up to Raffaelli in terms of compatibility. But there's an undeniable chemistry between the 2 leads. Bell told "We got this covered." "When we first met, we sort of looked each other up and sized each other up. But from the very first shot, the shells broke, and we realized that we actually really like each other."
Got a plan?
Kick his ass, don't get squashed.
When Daniel Craig's James Bond chases a nimble terrorist across the rooftops of Madagascar in Casino Royale, that's no ordinary stuntman he's pursuing. Bombmaker Malaka is played by Sebastian Foucan, an old friend of David Bell and one of parkour's earliest practitioners. When Bell and Foucan came to an impasse over the future of their passion, the latter moved to the United Kingdom and started calling the activity freerunning instead. It was in Northern England that the Frenchman got the chance to showcase his vision for freerunning by co-starring in the action film The Tournament. In writer-director Scott Mann's universe, a society of rich folks gather the best assassins in the world for a big shootout every 7 years. The killers all descend on a single town, and the last one standing walks away with a cool $10 million. Ving Rhames, Robert Carlyle, and Liam Cunningham all feature. But when it comes to the action, it's Foucan who truly impresses. The Freerunner's flowing moves work perfectly with the breakneck pace of the movie, often distracting viewers from some of its unfortunate narrative shortcomings. As Rob Hunter said in his review for Film School Rejects, Sebastian Foucan's leap onto a moving bus is pretty sweet. And while I don't pretend to understand the motivation behind some of his more extraneous parkour moves, I have to admit I'm entertained watching them. Freerunner was made on a much lower budget than most action films, and it definitely shows. Still, there's no denying that the parkour on display is outstanding. Lawrence Silverstein's film follows Ryan as he races across Cleveland with an explosive collar strapped around his neck. He's one of 8 freerunners selected to take part in a contest in which the winner gets $1 million and the losers die. As soon as one participant crosses the finish line, the remaining collars detonate. Shady businessmen watch the action unfold from afar, placing bets on the outcome. Ridiculous? Maybe. Worth watching? If you love inventive parkour and crazy stunts, absolutely. Movie Mavericks declared in its review, "Freerunner is fast and furious without the cars." International freerunning champion Ryan Doyle appeared in the film and was also in charge of choreography. But some of his work was sadly undone in post-production. Some shots in Freerunner seem like they end far too early. But the movie is worth checking out even just for snippets of the incredibly impressive moves.
All I know is after the race today, something just clicked.
Yeah, it's called a concussion.
No, it was a revelation.
Ong-Bak, the Thai warrior, introduced Tony Jaa to the wider world in spectacular fashion. Mixing the intensity of Bruce Lee with the acrobatics of Jackie Chan, Jaa is mesmerizing as humble Muay Thai master Ting, who lives in a rural village in Thailand. When thugs from Bangkok decapitate the village's prized Buddha statue and steal its head, Ting decides to follow them. And when he discovers that the mob has it in their possession, he throws himself headfirst into the underworld. The fight scenes in Ong-Bak are gritty and impeccably choreographed. But watching Ja run away from fights is just as entertaining. In one of the movie's most famous scenes, Ting goes into full Freerunner mode as he's chased through the narrow lanes of central Bangkok by over a dozen angry henchmen. The 6-minute sequence goes from impressive to off the charts as he out of town and performs front flips through narrow panes of glass and cannonballs through a ring of barbed wire that no man his size has any right fitting through. Ja turns his pursuers into a human parkour course when cornered, using them as stepping stones before scaling a wall and escaping. The critics absolutely loved it. And if you're an action fan, you will too.